It was one of those mornings when nothing seemed to go right. I had been up since dawn, patching leaks in the roof of my tiny house, when my old pickup finally gave up and refused to start. I was just about to head inside to make some tea when I saw him. A young man running frantically down the road, waving his arms like his life depended on it. "Please, sir," he shouted, panting as he reached my driveway. "Can you help me? I'm late for my exam, and there's no bus for miles." He couldn't have been older than 20, with a backpack slung over one shoulder and desperation in his eyes. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair a mess, but his face was all determination and panic. For a moment, I hesitated. My truck was temperamental at best, and the nearest town was nearly an hour away. But something in his voice, raw, urgent, hit me right in the chest. I couldn't say no. "Hop in," I said, grabbing my keys and offering a reassuring smile. "It's not a smooth ride, but it'll get you there." His face lit up with relief. "Thank you. You have no idea how much this means to me." As we drove, he explained how this exam was his last chance to qualify for a prestigious scholarship. If he missed it, his dream of becoming an engineer might vanish in an instant. I glanced at him, his hands fidgeting with the straps of his backpack. "Don't worry," I said, pressing the gas pedal a little harder. "We'll get you there." Little did I know, that ride would set off a chain of events that neither of us could have predicted. The old pickup groaned in protest as I pushed it harder than I probably should have. Every bump in the road rattled the frame, and I silently prayed it wouldn't give out on us. The student, he told me his name was Michael, kept checking his watch every few seconds, his knee bouncing nervously. "How far is it?" he asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "About 20 minutes if this old beast holds up," I said, tapping the dashboard affectionately. "We'll make it." The sky above darkened, threatening rain, and a strong wind picked up, blowing leaves across the road. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I didn't know why, but I felt like it wasn't just about getting him to an exam. It was bigger than that. The weight of it hung in the air. As we crested a hill, we saw flashing lights ahead. A police car blocked the road, and 2 officers were directing traffic. My stomach sank. Michael sat up straight. "No, no, no. We can't be delayed. I have less than 20 minutes. I rolled down the window and waved to one of the officers. "Hey, officer, what's going on?" "Road's closed up ahead. Tree fell on some power lines. Gonna take a while to clear it," the cop said. "You'll have to detour back about 10 miles and go around." Michael's face fell, his hope crumbling in an instant. I could see the panic creeping in. I glanced at him, then back at the officer. "Officer," I said, lowering my voice. "This kid's got the most important exam of his life in 20 minutes. There's got to be another way." The officer frowned but leaned in a little closer, glancing at Michael's anxious face. After a pause, he nodded toward a narrow dirt road off to the left. "Take the old service road through the woods. It'll connect you back to the main road about 5 miles down. But be careful, it's rough terrain." "Thank you," I said, nodding gratefully, and turned onto the service road. The dirt road was nothing short of a roller coaster. Mud, potholes, fallen branches, you name it. The truck bounced and groaned with every dip, and I could feel the tension growing. Michael clutched the door handle, his eyes wide. "You sure this is a good idea?" "Best one we've got," I said, grinning despite the chaos. "Hang on tight." As we barreled down the rough path, I couldn't help but laugh, partly out of nerves, partly because it felt like we were on a wild adventure. Michael finally cracked a smile too, though it was mixed with sheer terror. The road finally spit us back onto the main street, and I slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The clock was ticking. 5 more minutes, Michael muttered under his breath. "Just 5 more minutes." We skidded to a stop in front of the exam building with barely a minute to spare. Michael flew out of the truck, turning back just long enough to shout, "Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll never forget this." And just like that, he was gone, sprinting toward the entrance. I sat there for a moment, my heart pounding, watching him disappear through the doors. Something told me I hadn't seen the last of him. I didn't know how or why, but that kid, Michael, was going to cross paths with me again. For the next few months, life carried on like it always did, quiet and predictable. I patched up the house, picked up odd jobs around town, and spent my evenings fixing up my old truck. It wasn't much of a life, but it was mine. Sometimes, I'd think back to that wild drive with Michael. I wondered how he did on that exam, whether he got the scholarship he talked about with such passion. I figured I'd never know. After all, kids like him didn't hang around small towns like this once they made it big. Then one day, out of nowhere, I got a letter. It was postmarked from the city, written in neat handwriting I didn't recognize. My hands trembled a little as I opened it. Dear Sir, you probably don't remember me, but 5 months ago, you gave me a ride to my exam when I was completely out of options. That day changed everything for me. I passed the exam, got the scholarship, and now I'm finishing my engineering degree. I owe it all to you. You didn't have to help me that day, but you did. I've never forgotten your kindness. I'll be back in town soon, and I'd love to thank you properly. Sincerely, Michael. I read the letter twice, a warmth spreading through my chest. It felt like a spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Pride, maybe, or hope. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the pocket of my work shirt. I didn't expect much. Maybe he just wanted to say thank you in person, shake my hand, and move on with his life. But the fact that he remembered me at all meant more than I could say. A week later, I heard the unmistakable rumble of a car engine outside my house. Only it wasn't the sound of an old truck or a modest sedan. It was a deep, smooth purr that could only belong to a luxury car. I stepped outside and nearly lost my balance. Parked in front of my house was a sleek, black sports car that looked like it belonged in a movie. And leaning casually against the door was Michael. But he wasn't the same kid I had dropped off at the exam hall. This Michael stood taller, more confident. He wore a sharp suit, and there was an air about him. A quiet certainty that comes from knowing you've made it. Hey, he said, smiling warmly. Long time no see. I blinked, trying to reconcile the scruffy, panicked kid I'd given a ride to with the polished man standing in front of me. For a moment, all I could do was stare at the car. Sleek, shiny, and far too expensive for our sleepy little town. Michael, I said, finally finding my voice. Is that really you? He laughed and held out his hand. In the flesh. I told you I'd be back to thank you. I shook his hand, still dazed. Well, you've certainly done well for yourself. Michael glanced at the car, then back at me. Yeah, life's taken some unexpected turns. But none of it would have happened if it weren't for you. That ride changed everything for me. I waved him off, embarrassed. Oh, come on now. All I did was get you to your exam. You did the hard part. He shook his head, his expression turning serious. No, you did more than that. You believed in me when I was at my lowest. If you hadn't helped me, I wouldn't be where I am today. Before I could respond, Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of car keys. He held them out to me, a mischievous glint in his eyes. This is for you, he said. I took a step back, raising my hands. Whoa, hold on. What do you mean, this is for me? The car, he said, nodding toward the sleek black vehicle. It's yours. My jaw practically hit the ground. What? No, I can't take that. Yes, you can, he insisted, pressing the keys into my hand. I bought it for you. Consider it a thank you gift. I stared at the keys, feeling like I was holding something that belonged in a dream. Michael, this car is worth more than my house. I can't accept this. It's too much. But he just smiled, his eyes filled with that same determination I'd seen when he begged me for a ride. Trust me, it's not too much. You deserve it. Besides, I've got plenty of cars now. This one's special, though. I wanted you to have it. For a long moment, I stood there, speechless. The thought of driving a car like that was so far out of my reality, it didn't even seem possible. But before I could respond, something caught my eye. A black SUV parked down the street. It had tinted windows, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Michael noticed my hesitation. What's wrong? I nodded toward the SUV. You know that car? He turned, his smile fading into a sharp line. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time since he arrived, he looked worried. I've seen it before, he said quietly. Recently. I thought it was a coincidence. Suddenly, the air felt heavy, the joy of the moment replaced by an uneasy tension. "Get inside," Michael said, his voice low and serious. "We need to talk." Michael's tone sent a chill down my spine. Without a word, we hurried inside. I locked the door behind us, peeking through the curtain at the black SUV. It hadn't moved, just sitting there like a patient predator. Michael paced the small living room, his jaw clenched. "I hoped it wouldn't follow me here," he muttered under his breath. "What's going on, Michael?" I asked, crossing my arms. "Who's in that car?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. The confident man from earlier was gone, replaced by someone who looked cornered. "It's complicated," he said. "I've made some powerful enemies." I raised an eyebrow. "Enemies? You're an engineer, not a spy." "Not exactly," he said, giving me a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "When I got that scholarship, I worked hard and climbed fast. I ended up in the tech industry, developing security software for some big companies. My software was supposed to protect people, but someone repurposed it." "Repurposed?" I echoed. Michael nodded grimly. "They used it for surveillance, tracking people without their knowledge. When I found out, I tried to stop it, but it was too late. They'd already sold the technology to some very dangerous people. I blew the whistle, went public with what I knew, and made a few powerful enemies in the process." "And now they're after you?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "They've been watching me ever since," he said, glancing toward the window. "But I didn't think they'd follow me all the way out here." I rubbed the back of my neck, trying to process everything. "So what do we do now? Call the cops?" "No," Michael said quickly. "These people are connected. If we call the police, it could make things worse." My mind raced. This wasn't the kind of problem I ever expected to face. I was a simple man with a simple life, one that didn't involve black SUVs or tech conspiracies. Michael looked at me, his eyes steady despite the tension. "I'm sorry I brought this trouble to your doorstep. I thought I was just coming back to say thank you, not to drag you into this." I shook my head. "You're not dragging me into anything, kid. You're in trouble, and I'm not about to let you face it alone." For a second, a flicker of gratitude crossed his face. "We need to leave," he said. "If they're watching the house, they're waiting for the right moment to make a move. We have to stay one step ahead." I grabbed my jacket, heart thudding in my chest. "We'll take my truck," I said. "It's not fast, but it'll get us out of town unnoticed." Michael nodded. "Let's go." As we stepped outside, I glanced back at the SUV. The driver's window rolled down just a crack, and I could feel eyes watching us. "Stay close," I whispered to Michael. The engine of the SUV growled to life as we climbed into the truck. My hands gripped the wheel tight as we pulled out of the driveway. The SUV followed at a distance, its presence like a shadow that refused to leave. Michael glanced at me, his face pale but determined. "We're not out of this yet." The gravel crunched under the tires as I turned onto the main road, my pulse racing. The black SUV kept its distance, but it was clear we weren't shaking it anytime soon. "We need a plan," I muttered, eyes flicking between the rearview mirror and the winding road ahead. "You know where we're going?" Michael leaned forward, scanning the road. "Head toward the old mill on the outskirts of town. It's abandoned. We can figure out our next move there." I nodded and pressed the gas pedal a little harder. My old truck groaned in protest, but it held steady. Behind us, the SUV sped up, its headlights growing brighter with each passing second. "They're closing in," Michael said, his voice tight with urgency. The road twisted through the woods, and the trees grew denser, casting long shadows that flickered across the windshield. I knew these roads like the back of my hand, but even I wasn't sure how long we could outrun a vehicle like that. "Hold on," I said, taking a sharp turn onto a narrow side road that was little more than a dirt path. The truck bounced and jolted as we hit every rut and pothole, the tires kicking up dust and leaves in our wake. The SUV followed, its sleek frame gliding over the rough terrain like it was built for this. "Not exactly losing them," Michael muttered, gripping the door handle. I gritted my teeth. "Trust me, this road gets trickier up ahead." And I wasn't lying. The path narrowed even more, lined with deep ditches on either side. One wrong move, and we'd end up nose-deep in a muddy trench. I glanced at the mirror, just in time to see the SUV swerve to avoid a large rock. The driver overcorrected, the back end skidding dangerously close to the ditch before they regained control. "They're good," Michael said, his eyes wide. "Really good." "Yeah, well, so am I," I shot back, steering toward an old wooden bridge that spanned a shallow creek. "Hold your breath. This bridge is older than I am." The boards groaned beneath us as the truck rolled across. For a moment, I thought they'd hold. But just as we reached the other side, I heard a sharp crack. The bridge collapsed behind us in a cloud of dust and splintered wood, leaving a gaping hole in our wake. The SUV skidded to a stop just before the edge, its tires kicking up gravel. The driver revved the engine, but there was no way across. Michael exhaled, leaning back in his seat. "Nice move." I smiled, though my hands were still trembling on the wheel. "Told you I knew these roads." But the relief was short-lived. The SUV's door opened, and a tall figure stepped out, raising a phone to their ear. "They're calling for backup," Michael said grimly. "We've bought ourselves a little time," I said, steering back onto the main road. "But not much." Michael turned to me, his expression serious. "I know someone who can help us, someone I trust, but it's a couple of hours away. Do you think this truck can make it?" I glanced at the dashboard, the needle hovering dangerously close to empty. "If we're lucky." Michael leaned back, his jaw set. "We've already come this far. Let's push our luck." The road stretched out before us, the darkening sky heavy with clouds. Michael's directions led us toward a remote farmhouse nestled at the edge of a dense forest. It was miles from the nearest town, surrounded by fields that looked like they hadn't seen life in years. The truck sputtered as we pulled into the driveway. I gave the dashboard a reassuring pat. "Good job, old girl," I muttered. Michael jumped out, scanning the area. "She should be here," he said under his breath. He knocked on the front door, a pattern of 3 short knocks, followed by 2 longer ones. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the door creaked open just wide enough for a woman's face to appear. "Michael." Her voice was low, cautious. "It's me," he said, stepping back to show her it was safe. "We need help, Claire." The door swung open, revealing a woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes and an air of quiet strength. She glanced at me before pulling Michael inside. "Who's he?" she asked, closing the door behind us and locking it with practiced precision. "He's the one who helped me back when this all started," Michael said. "We wouldn't have made it this far without him." Claire studied me for a second before nodding. "Fair enough. But you've brought trouble with you, haven't you?" Michael nodded grimly. "They've been following me. They're getting bolder." Claire crossed her arms. "Then we'll have to move fast. I've got contacts who can help, but it'll take some time." "Time's not something we have much of," I said. "They're calling for backup." Claire didn't flinch. "Let them come," she said. "I've dealt with worse." She led us to a hidden room in the back, stocked with supplies, extra clothes, a first aid kit, and what looked like a sophisticated communication setup. "You weren't kidding about being prepared," I said, impressed. "Always be ready for the worst," she said with a wry smile. Over the next hour, Claire worked her contacts, sending out encrypted messages and checking for any updates on Michael's pursuers. Meanwhile, I paced the room, feeling useless. Michael sat at the table, his head in his hands. "We can't keep running forever," he said quietly. "They'll always find me." Claire looked up from her laptop. "Then we don't run. We fight back." I stopped pacing. "What do you mean, fight back?" "We expose them," Claire said, her eyes sharp. "We gather evidence and release it to the right people. Public pressure is the only thing that can take these guys down." Michael hesitated. "But that could make things worse for us." "Or it could end it once and for all," Claire countered. "It's risky, but it's our best shot." I nodded slowly. "If it means we stop looking over our shoulders, I'm in." With Claire's plan in motion, we set up at an old radio tower deep in the forest, where we could broadcast the evidence without being traced. Michael worked frantically, piecing together files and uploading them while Claire monitored security feeds. It felt like a ticking time bomb. Every second stretched longer than the last. Then we heard it, a car approaching fast. "They found us," Claire said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. We need 5 more minutes to get everything out. Michael's eyes locked on mine. Can you buy us some time? I grabbed a crowbar from the corner and nodded. I'll do my best. I slipped outside, my heart pounding. The car skidded to a stop, and 3 men stepped out. Each one of them looked like they meant business. Evening, gentlemen, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Can I help you with something? Step aside, the tallest one said. We're not here for you. See, that's the thing, I said, gripping the crowbar tighter. I'm not planning on letting you through. The man smirked. Wrong answer. He lunged at me, but I was quicker than he expected. I swung the crowbar, catching him across the arm. His 2 partners hesitated, clearly surprised I wasn't running. That hesitation was all I needed. Now, Michael, I shouted over my shoulder. Inside, I heard the hum of a signal going live. Claire's voice echoed through the speakers. The truth is out there now, she said. There's no stopping it. By the time the authorities arrived, it was over. The evidence was everywhere. News outlets were picking it up, social media was ablaze, and the people Michael had feared so much were suddenly on the defensive. Claire watched the live feed with a satisfied smile. Looks like we won. Michael sat down heavily, relief washing over him. I can't believe it's finally over. I clapped him on the shoulder. You did it, kid. Michael smiled, but there was something deeper in his eyes. A gratitude that went beyond words. No, he said. We did it. All of us. As dawn broke over the forest, I realized that my life, the simple, quiet life I thought I'd always have, had changed in ways I never could have imagined. Michael handed me the car keys once again, this time with a wink. No more running. You've earned this. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be, surrounded by friends, no longer running from shadows. And that car? Well, it's parked in my driveway to this day. A reminder that sometimes, a single act of kindness can lead you down a road you never expected.